lines are cut. We are recording. I do want to let you know that. We're just really honored that you all joined us, and we just thank you so much for coming on. We have put together a series of workshops in our Economic Development Department so that you can hear from field experts on various topics. And, of course, we all know that funding is a very, very popular subject, regardless of what our economic conditions are. Every nonprofit wants to know how to better compete for funding. So that's what we're providing to you today. And we have Julie Jakopic. She was here for successfully competing for Part 1, and she's back with us again. And so we're going to, before I officially introduce her, I just want to let you know that we have a few little housekeeping items to make you aware of. Of course, I told you you're being recorded, although, at this time we can't hear you, but the reason why I want to let you know that we have the question and answer icon at the upper right-hand corner of your screen, where you can ask a question to me, to Julie, and we will be able to ask questions or answer your questions. If you you can do it, or you can chat, and you do a private chat. If you have a technical question, you can just send that to me, Linda Hembry. And also, I want to let you know that the webinar is going to be available afterwards. We will email you that to your email as you've registered with, as well as we will also make it available on our website at partnershipced.org. So I'm going to, as we get started, I'm going to find out a little bit about you. So I'm going to actually put a poll for, to get an idea of who is with us. So let me question for you all. I have this. See if I can go there. Add it up. Let's see. Take me a minute here and bear with me as I get question out. Okay. I'm going to send this poll for the audience, and if you would just respond to the question there, then we can find out a little bit about what's going on with you before we get started, so we can give us a light idea of what you're doing. And for the webinar, I may a few questions as Julie is speaking and find out a little bit about you as it relates to the subject matter as well. So since you guys can't, unfortunately you're muted, we do kind of want to know who's on the line and that sort of thing too. So the question is, how do you currently have CED projects or finishing projects are engaged in CED projects right now? It looks like most of you do. Those who are on the line do have projects that you're completing. So, I know a little bit about your title. So I'm going to open this second poll and ask about your as it relates to what kind of line with us. So should be able to open that. We'll have to come back to that one. I'm going to move on to Julie. So Julie, so you may know her. She is the president of iLead Strategies, and she's been, of course, involved in the Community Action Network for over 20 years. She's very experienced and knowledgeable speaker. She's implemented funding strategies for several nonprofits, corporate organizations. She's nationally recognized speaker, a professional coach, a business facilitator and strategist. Been at our conferences, and her workshops are always well attended, as well as she has a master's in sociology and a BA in Communications from University of Maryland. So Jakopic is a very, very appropriate speaker for this topic. So I am going to, without any further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to her in a few seconds here, as soon as we are going to turn it over to Julie, and she is the next voice that you will hear as we go to our topic.
I appreciate it. I appreciate you all being here today. I know this has been a week filled with lots of webinars, and given that it's June, lots of proposal meetings. I want to tell you a little about what we're going to talk about over the next hour. And we're going to do a little bit of review from last time, because I think as we think about things that apply in government, paying from government apply in the foundation sector as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then I want to talk about the perspective of a funder, and thinking about what that looks like and what that means for how you respond, how you interact. And so take time to think about how foundations and corporate foundations or corporate investors look different than government. Read the funding cycle and look at how that applies in the foundation sector. And one of the things that's particularly different about the foundation world is really the importance of relationships. So that's kind of what we're going to go over, and feel free to send us any questions you have as we go through. I'll start a couple of points and take questions. Last 2 weeks ago, we talked a little bit about 10 things to think about when you decide to apply for a grant. Applying takes a lot of time and a lot of energy, and you want to make sure that you do that well. And while we talked last time from the perspective of government funder, the same kinds of questions apply for the foundation sector. The first thing you always want to know is this question of strategic fit. Does the opportunity actually match the work that your agency does or the work that your agency intends to do? Secondly, and we'll spend a lot of time this hour talking about relationships, do you already have a relationship with the foundation? If not, what are some ways you can begin to 6 degrees of separation to find folks that they know that you can connect and begin to build that relationship? One way you can do that is applying for funding. Sometimes it really takes a second application to really build that relationship. So the thing that you'd want to ask up front is, where are you in that relationship process? What's the kind of landscape in your community? Is there one major foundation and 27 nonprofits applying to them? Or is there fairly few organizations who are doing the same thing that you're doing, or a fairly large number of foundations who could be approached? Differentiators. What makes your organization particularly different? And in community action, oftentimes it's the breadth of opportunities you provide the folks that your agency serves. There are very few other kinds of nonprofit organizations that have that capacity to wrap services around the needs of a particular family and help them progress. So, but that's one that's generic. What are the ones that are really specific about your community action agency? And it may be your history in the community. It might be a particular partnership. It might be a previous grant that you're building on. But what makes you different? Performance. What are you going to be able to say about what you've done in an area in the past, and who are you going to be able to turn to verify or strengthen a proposal by sharing how well someone else perceives your work to be? And that might be clients, that might be other organizations, but how can you share that story of your past? Execution. And what I mean here is, what's your capacity to actually deliver on the proposal that you're in? If you're in the middle of a transformation in your own organization, taking on a new opportunity may be just right, and it may also be the thing that is going to get your drift. So really being clear about your capacity to execute. Particularly in the foundation world, you don't make the mistake of applying for a project that you're difficulty executing, because while you may need the money up front, the second, third, or fourth funding opportunity can be ruined by a bad relationship in the first one. So you really want to be serious about your capacity to actually execute a project. What's the true potential of a relationship with this funding source? Is a 1-year grant for a plan? Is this a 1-year grant for implementation? Is this a 5-year grant? The organization historically fund agencies over time. Knowing that going in sort of allows you to weigh the benefits and risks at the time you're going to put in to build that application and that project. Risk really refers to what's the risk. Is there any risk in your application, impact on other programs of your agency, on relationship with other partners, on funding opportunities, on the work you're currently doing? You want to make sure that you've thought through any issues there. Get the proposal done. In the foundation world, the news is actually really good there, where the government funding cycle is what it is. It is almost always about writing in the summer for a September due date. Foundations often, A, don't usually work on the federal fiscal year. B, often have multiple funding cycles within a given year. So, proposal side, the real question is, do you apply now or do you apply in the next funding cycle? And we talked 2 weeks ago when we talked about government funding, can you compete on price matters. In the foundation world, what you really want to know is really just as simple as are your rates and your expectations both A, realistic, can you do it for the money you're going to need to ask for, and B, is that within the normal market range? And in terms of community action, I would imagine in both of those cases, in the foundation world, price is actually not really an issue, but on the government side, it could be. Specific to foundations, but non-governmental funding sources, I think in community action, we're very used to government funding. And so we kind of have a pretty good sense of what the government cares about, not so much around what non-governmental funding sources care about. So I've tried to break down what I think the sort of steps of building the relationship with a funder really are. The first is knowing what that audience cares about, and in a minute we're going to kind of go through some comparisons about what those things might be. Secondly, I want to ask SMART. I didn't capitalize the SMART. We're not talking about SMART goals here, but ask in the sense that you really have done your homework. You know that you've gone to the Foundation Center online, you've gone to the Chronicle of Philanthropy, you have an idea of what that funder funds, you've gone to their website, read their criteria, looked at who they have funded in the past. You're prepared to describe what you need or what your hopes are in the frame of the things they care about, as opposed to going in cold. Deliver. Particularly in the foundation world, and we'll talk a little bit more in a second about why, but relationship really matters. So if they fund you and you do well, that relationship will carry you forward. If they fund you and an issue and you work with them to resolve it, that relationship carries you forward. They fund you and you fail, what they were the failure, and they, like government funders, are not doing a strict point score system that holds everyone equal, right? They get that. They're private organizations. They have some flexibility in who they choose. So creating a bad relationship can follow you in a way in the foundation world that doesn't in other places. Share results. I think we're really good at doing the reports we have to do. Foundation world basically requires a 6-month report. It's usually how did you spend our money and a narrative. You have some outcomes that you report on, but in general, the foundation world doesn't have the same kinds of performance standard reporting expectations that the federal and state and local government world does. That doesn't mean you shouldn't share those answers. And I think it's easy to look at the reporting requirements and our response to the requirements. But the truth is, the more you can tell them about their impact, again, you're building that relationship, and the more engaged they will be. The last one sounds really silly and obvious, but say thank you. I can't tell you how rare it is for a funder to have the experience of somebody thanking them for their investment, for their interest, for doing the work they do. Actually true on the federal side as well. There are folks I know who love the award time of year because they get to make really fun phone calls and award money to folks, as opposed to the kind of calls they take all year where they're either saying no or negotiating or whatever. It means a ton to them to have somebody say, we really appreciate your investment. And I think tendency to say, oh, good, we got the award, and our next communication will be our first report. Engage folks when you're not asking for something is a really important part of this process. I think these 5 points actually relate to any funder. There's some particular reasons why I wanted to focus on them today, and part of it is this difference in the way foundation world funding. So I think 3 kinds of questions we really want to focus on around what funders are looking at. is, what do they want, right? What are they being held accountable for? What worries them? What keeps them up at 4 in the morning? What rouses them? What is super exciting to them? I have been very narrow as I go through these. Think both about government, traditional foundations, and then corporate foundations as well. But I'd be curious through email comments or Q&A to hear you a little bit about these things that you want to add to, and I'm happy to use the opportunity to actually share that with your colleagues. Talk about government. So the funder perspective, government provides money based on appropriations, based on legislation, and what they're held accountable to, what they're looking for is meeting the legislative mandate of the project. So have a pretty clear picture of what they need to have grantees do, and the degree to which they can describe what that is and engage and fund organizations who will deliver on the legislative mandate is what they're held accountable to. The thing that keeps them up at night around the grant process is that it's fair, that it was uniform, and that it gets done on time. So we talked time about how important in the federal world it is to have everything done by the end of September 30th, which we have to back all of their processes up to make it happen. And there are a fair amount, it's public money. So because it's public money, there's an amount of rules about a uniform process where there's no favoritism. Despite the fact that having a relationship can help shape an RFP and is important, the truth is that the official process is pretty agnostic to relationship. There may be additional points in the organizational experience sections or the personnel sections that recognize longevity at a particular or expertise in a particular field, but it's fairly difficult on that to pick people right? In the government world, the whole idea is a very fair, uniform, timely process. Fair meaning everyone of equal stature had an equal opportunity. Uniform in that the rules and processes and review steps are exactly the same for every applicant, and it meets the timeline of the appropriations world. Wow, for government funders, obviously your results matter, but the thing that's most scary is an article in the newspaper saying they wasted taxpayer dollars. So while they really want positive results, the thing that they worry about most is actual results, because that's what can take a federal program down, right? That's the foundation side, and think about how this might actually differ. On the foundation side, by legislation, but by the funding that support their organization. So most foundations are founded with charitable dollars, oftentimes in honor of or through the estate of someone. The enormous flexibility as long as it meets a social mission. Foundation to decide its own priorities, and so you'll see foundations that maybe have a regional emphasis or focus on early childhood education and job creation, anything in the middle, or that are tied to a very specific area of funding. Or you might find an organization, the Office of Community Services funds community services. It doesn't fund arts, but you might find that invest in early childhood education, community development, and artistic endeavor. That all of those things are up to the organization, and so what they want is that the work is consistent with their founder's mission. The word out is that they spent those dollars well, that they made an investment. The work they're investing in is changing the way the world works. So unlike federal proposal, their interest really is about creative solutions and outstanding results. They can take some risks, right? An adverse result from a foundation effort, that's private money. So even if there's a problem, it doesn't have the same explosive, bring everyone else down effect that it does in government. So the opportunity for real innovation, for funding for real innovation, for funding that's about creativity is in the foundation world. They're going to say that they're interested in projects that achieve a particular result, but the how and the standards could be entirely up to you. And they're looking for that which is most creative and most groundbreaking. A little bit when you're talking about a corporate foundation. So we're thinking about, say, the Home Depot Foundation, related to Home Depot, or a foundation related to a particular kind of business. Again, it needs to be consistent with mission. Often it's consistent with the corporate mission. So you'll find organizations that provide and building materials, looking at housing and and low-income commercial development. You might find, a pharmaceutical company's corporate foundation investing in something related to health. There's a consistency. Worry is a little more like government. They don't want to embarrass the parent corporation. So the thing that worries them is not that you're not perfectly successful, but that in some way they're going to tarnish the organization that's actually creating the funding. In the case of corporate foundations over the other kinds of funders, they really like to be recognized for their work. So naming a classroom, naming a building, recognizing someone at an award celebration. All of those things really matter to the corporate funder in a way that matter less to some of the other kinds of organizations. Let's stop and see if there are any questions around this sort of perspective idea.
I don't see questions, but you're all welcome to, at this point, submit any that you may have through your question and answer or Q&A tab up in the upper right-hand corner. My right, maybe your left, not too sure. Okay. All right, go ahead, Julie. I don't see any questions so far. Well, someone's coming in with questions. Actually.
Yeah.
You see anything? Yeah, why not?
No, I see the CED question.
But this person is, let's see. Okay, let's see. Laura says, is there a resource for best practice in developing relationships with foundations?
Single site. There's something, I really think that there's a slide I probably should have put in here, and what I will do, Linda, is I will give you a separate slide with a bunch of links to foundation resources. I'm not sure there's a perfect guide to building a relationship, but it's the perfect segue to where we're going to in just a second. Actually, let's just spend some time here thinking about it. Playing with slides a little bit. There's a ways to build a relationship with a foundation. The first and most typical in the nonprofit sector, although not always in the community action sector, is that there's someone with a relationship with a foundation serving on a board. So it may be that a member of the board of directors either is a partner organization with relationships with foundations that fund them, is a staff person from a foundation, has experience getting grants from a foundation, is on the board of a foundation. Because in the end, the foundations are really looking for the best ideas, and because they're willing to take risks, they're looking for the people they trust. So one is that. The other is, how do you start building that? And some of it really is doing the online research to say, who on our board? Anybody on that board? Who on board has ever been funded by that organization? And really doing what I sort of jokingly refer to as 6 degrees of separation, that sort of, who knows who. And, a lesson somebody taught me a really long time ago that never fails to be true is ask for money, get advice, ask for advice, get money. Strategy really is about finding the relationships. You can find a connection. If you may actually need an executive director to say, to make a cold call, and it really is like an information interview when we were interviewing for jobs, right? It really is. I just wanted to find out more about what you guys do. I want you to be aware we exist and what we do. If you've got a relationship, then what you're really hoping is that the board member says, I'm working with this great nonprofit community action of herb slips, and I really would love it if you could spend half an hour over coffee and just get to know them. And that initial conversation is really about where are areas of shared interest. And the question is not necessarily winning cycle, what are our chances, but who else do you think we should talk to? Who else should we look at? Creating a conversation. Is there something, some institutions offer training or opportunities for capacity building, and while certain community action agencies have a tremendous experience with funding, sometimes participating in those are helpful. If your organization does things that could be helpful for the foundation's grantees, offering to create a link or a special phone number or a special day or a special presentation to help other grantees is a way of building a relationship. It really is exactly like building a relationship with another person, right? How to be helpful? It's really about service and more shared interest. Typical process of relationship with a foundation, it's unusual on a completely cold situation to say, oh, they have an RFP and proposals are due on a month from next Thursday. Let's submit one. I think on the first cycle, not so much. It's an actually good strategy. However, if what your goal is actually to get to know the foundation, if you've sort of looked at who you know and who they know and you can't find the intersection, sometimes that first round proposal or the two-year pre-proposal application that folks ask for sometimes is the way to actually begin the relationship. What you're looking for is the opportunity to have a live conversation with the person. Not necessarily, funding, great. What you really want to do is put your best foot forward, knowing that you may not get funded on the first round. But by not getting funded, you have the opportunity, particularly if you've been in the ballpark, to say, we need to get debriefed on this, and we need to show you what we're currently doing if you could spare a little bit of time. Ask in a very sort of low-key way for that opportunity to personally engage with the funder. Questions?
No, we'll go ahead and move on.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about building the relationship. The second thing that I think really matters in terms of building relationships with foundation funders is that it is compelling. I think on the government funding side, we all look at proposals and the more clear they are, the room there is to be creative. The more steps they require, the more 2-point valued elements that must be present. The opportunity we have to bring to the table our best idea. The idea is to have a standard set of what those ideas are. I apologize, there's a siren in the background for a second. Innovation side, they're looking to be surprised. They're looking for the cool thing. So if you have a compelling idea for how you can combine services or how you can bring services to a new part of the world, or how something you're already doing needs to expand because it has profound impact, the compelling idea is what really, I think, sells and works well in the foundation world. The corporate foundation world in particular, some of it is also bringing a business mindset to that compelling idea and thinking about, how it lines up with ultimately the corporate entity. And the reason for that is because in the corporate foundation world, the people who are likely to read your proposal and the people who are likely to score your proposal are corporations. So at the end of the day, we as a community are sometimes really good at talking to each other. We sometimes are not as good at framing our conversation in the perspective of our audience. Foundation audience, in the traditional foundation audience, people are looking around mission. Oftentimes those writers are family members, and they are driven by the story of what foundation in the first place. In the corporate side, they're really trying to demonstrate a corporate commitment to community. So they come with their corporate values and their corporate mindset, and so being able to speak to that becomes really important. A third big piece for working with foundations is the capacity to execute. I sort of referred to this earlier. At the end of the day, these are organizations. They what they deem to be the best. They often will have common applications and some standards about scoring and what things are most important. The rules about uniformity of that process are very different, and so they're really going to go after, particularly around new ideas that haven't been tried before. The thing that they can go after are people they trust. to try. So your capacity to execute is important at the first one, important to them in understanding your capacity. It's important for the foundation to understand your capacity to execute. Actually did, because if you're funded by a foundation and you are not able to execute, that too is something that will be in the minds of the folks who are reviewing proposals. Typically, foundations, except very large ones, have a fairly stable pool of reviewers. They're often related to the board of the organization. And so the good news is, the more they see good things from you, the more likely they are to fund you. Equally true is when they see things that don't work, the likelihood of them going, great proposal, we know they can't deliver. You don't have that conversation, because in the private world, that information can be used. I think we talked a little bit last time about in the government world, the only thing that reviewers can look at is the proposal you submitted and the RFP you responded to. They cannot go online. They cannot look anywhere else. Guess what? The foundation will can, and they will. Google your name. They will look for who knows your executive director if they're interested. They'll try to find those things out. So your capacity to deliver becomes even more important in this world. On the other hand, while this is a different way of thinking from some of our traditional sources of funding, there's enormous flexibility in foundation grants. If you get a government grant and you have a problem and you need to change horses in the middle of the stream, it's not very easy to do that. In a funding project, a good relationship with your foundation project officer can help you adapt if you need to adapt. So a much more flexible funding stream typically is offered at a different, often a more frequent funding cycle. Once you have these relationships, they can pay off for years and years and years. And usually, foundations like the good new idea, and they are woefully criticized for not supporting basic operations in the way that we actually believe the nonprofit sector needs to be supported. They do tend to continue to reinvest in organizations they trust to deliver. So these are relationships absolutely worth building and pay off over time. A story, I love this quote. When you're conversing with coworkers, customers, or investors, the richness and meaning of your story is what people really buy. Everybody thinks it's the return on investment that you're selling, but it's really the story about the return that investor takes away. Try to use some examples when we're talking here. Is that those examples are what how you're going to remember these slides. You're not going to go memorize my stupid slides, right? But you remember that I talked about a family coming together to decide how they're going to divvy up the funds their family member committed to community investment. And you'll remember that piece. So flexible things about the foundation world is while there's a structure to the proposal, it's a much less rigid one. And you have the opportunity to tell a rich story about the compelling idea. You have page limits, but you probably have more flexibility about where you put things in a lot of cases. And you can tell the story of the particular family and walk the family through the program. You can tell the story about all of the kids in your social tour last summer who our own landscaping company for the summer, and what happened to those kids because they did that and you helped them do it. Those stories you can actually tell them a whole lot better in the foundation world, and it becomes more important. In the government world, people are trying to apply a scoring system with a sort of rigidity, so that something always means what it always means, right? In the foundation world, you really are trying to get to people's hearts. Oops. Let's talk about what that means. You really want to touch the perspective of the funder. So if you're applying for funds from an organization, let's talk about Annie E. Casey for a minute. Annie Casey is a very large national foundation. Most of you have probably heard of it. Most of you probably know that it was founded by the sons of by the guy yes, and founded in honor very much of Annie E. Casey, his mother, who was a single mom raising boys on by herself. So even at Casey, as big as it is and as long as it's been around, that story underlies what they care about and where they make their investments. And so tell a story about the single mom families you serve is really full and an appropriate frame. It connects with where people actually are. The foundations, go on their website, see what their history is. Tie your story to the things that they care about, because that history, unlike, I don't have an example of it. I only have good examples today. I like a situation where an organization was founded 100, 200 years ago, and no one who has any connection to that original story is still there. In the foundation world, there's a fair amount of longevity and interconnectedness over time, so that you're really going to see people who really identify with that mission. So getting to that mission very early becomes really important, and using that to frame the story that you're telling. Again, you want to show people things as opposed to tell them. Easy example, and you can do it with words, you can also do it with pictures, but at the end of the day, it's instead of saying, we do great work, 17 other people say so, it's here are results we achieved when we tried it this way. We believe this new idea will change those in the following way. So really using the data that you collect, and I know you all collect more data than most nonprofits, right? Because I remember when I used to write the report. So how can you use that data to show, to demonstrate using things you do? Now, foundation world, it may not just be the results that you want to tell. It may be about the demographics of who you're serving and the graph and the story of a particular person or a particular way you've been helpful. Administration, while this is the same slide from 2 weeks ago, are a great way to deal with space issues. They're all a great way to kind of hit a double punch, right? You're going to describe in words what you're going to describe. That picture will walk away with people. People will memorize a paragraph, but they'll remember what a graph looks like. They'll remember what the face of someone in a picture looks like. You also want to write to who the evaluators are. So you want to write, again, in the foundation sector, you're looking at folks who are not tied to a process, not so much tied to legislation, but personally invested in what they're looking at. What's the personal story? What's the personal frame? So I've talked a lot about the family examples around the traditional foundation, but if a corporate foundation, if it's Home Depot and it's about their materials, people read that proposal need to know that the materials came from them. People want to know that they made the investment. People want to know how that's going to get shared. We're going to build these houses and we're going to talk about this piece of it. Reach back to your employees in the following way. We'll show this return on investment. You're going to take this investment and we're going to show you the change in people's lives. And many of you run iLead programs and are looking for your private sector match funds for the Assets for Independence program. You are building depositors in a bank, right? You are building future contributors, business people, future customers. And in the corporate sector, talking about how that relates back to the core business of the corporate field becomes important. If you know who the evaluators are likely to be, tying it to what you know about their story. And if you know that one of the board members has a child with a medical issue and you're serving families with that medical issue, you want to go ahead and tell them that. Show how you are like them in any funding application and that you understand what they're looking for. So personal response becomes really important. I want to go back and talk about the funding cycle, which I skipped to kind of move on to the story. So we got this funding cycle last time in terms of the government, right? That there's a problem identified, they can see solutions, they issue a request for proposal, those proposals are scored, there's best and final negotiation, and then contracts are awarded or grants are awarded. The process is not particularly different in the foundation world, except for a few things. It is likely to occur it may occur more than once a year. The request for proposal may start with asking for a 2-page overview from which a smaller number of folks are asked to submit full proposals. Those are really worth doing. Again, you can make a relatively small investment. If you get rejected at that point, I'd still look for the opportunity. We'd like to do better. We'd like to see a better fit. We'd like to understand what we could have done differently. And it's always a sense of shame, oops, we blew it. It's great, let's learn, right? So tell us more. How can we do better? And if you get into that conversation, and it was a great idea. It doesn't fit what we want to fund this year. Okay, what do you want to fund? And more importantly, if you thought this was a great idea, where else should we take it? Who else should we talk to? There's much more opportunity for dialogue in this process. The score issues, you're going to get much less in terms of, like saying, sort of a structured debrief where you get everybody's comments, but you can have that actual conversation. Every opportunity to have a conversation is the opportunity to build a relationship, and in the foundation world, again, organizations we recognize and we trust are far more likely to receive funding. And so I want to continue on down that path. There are a couple of outstanding sources that I will send links for. I apologize. I thought the slide was here and it's not. But let me tell you, because you can Google them as well. The Chronicle of Philanthropy. We don't, as a network, typically read this. What I find really helpful is it's a great way to understand how foundations think about their work. So Chronicle of Philanthropy is essentially a trade journal for foundations. And them it's where you find out who's awarding what kind of money to who. It's also about what's happening with how they're growing their investments, what's happening with their funding, what are they looking for. This is really, it's the trade paper, and it's an incredibly good view into how they see the world. Foundation Center is probably one of the best resources to find out what kinds of foundations are funding what. It is, if richness you really want, it is a bit of a financial investment, although not huge. My suggestion about how to do it is that you, particularly if you've got a couple of great interns this summer, you make a 30 or 90-day investment and you use as much time as you possibly can put into asking every search question, pull out all of the data that you want to use to look for, then let the subscription go. So you make a big investment for a short amount of time, and then you start working that investment. I mean that you find 10 potential funders for a particular idea, and then what you're doing is working, okay, so which organizations are these? What do we know? Who do we know? Which ones are the best fit for us? The Foundation Center is an incredibly useful resource in that sense. Two biggies. Center for Nonprofit Advancement has some good materials. BoardSource has some good materials, and I will give Linda the links for those. I'd like to give a chance to do some questions again about particular topics that we could look at.
Let's see. Don't have any questions from the audience.
There's a little bit of a lag. So.
Okay.
One. Yeah.
Oh, that was. I think we already that one. Yeah, there was. That one was already answered. But in that, what I would like to do is ask you all a question of your funding experience. What have you had? What sort of experiences have you had in applying for funding? So I would like to open a poll and I'll respond to the answers to these questions. Applying for funding, have you had difficulty with federal funding, private funding? Has it been you've applied for funding and have gotten it, or has it been just you're having difficulty keeping funding? And perhaps Julie can answer some questions on what our results are. So we do have both in our progress of making of answering these questions. We'll wait and hear from them.
While you're answering the poll, let me answer a couple of questions that I did see. I'm not sure if we're looking at the same thing, Linda. One of the questions was, do community action agencies typically apply for this kind of funding? 70%, but less of community action agency funding nationally is federal.
Oh.
20% other government, and somewhere between 10 and 15% is private funding, some of which is actually in-kind donation. So this has not been a place that community action in particular has invested in looking as a funding source. But the truth is that it actually puts as much money out in any given year as the federal government does. I think as we look at ways to address likely to be cuts in the availability of federal funding for the programs we care about, really which ones are going to get hit in which way. As we sort of address some of those things, it becomes important, I think, to think about whether some of the other funding sources and to building those relationships now, so that if we're looking at cuts in 2014, you've started to build those relationships. The other thing that we talked a little bit related to that about 2 weeks ago is this idea of ebb and flow. So historically, as one kind of funding grew, had a problem, the others grew. So at the beginning of the recession, foundations who essentially are getting money they make based on profits that they make in the stock market and other places, or interest on their endowments, as interest rates fell and stock issues fell, part of the of RO was replacing foundation money. We are moving into a situation where the business community and the interest and profit side is actually doing better, looking at the likelihood of government pulling back. And so having a good mix across that boundary becomes really important as we sort of deal with this turbulent funding cycle. If you go to an older webinar I think I did last year on sustainability, we talked a little bit about that relationship there, and that might actually be a useful link for me to think to include again in the links I will send.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Julie, for that. Just to give the response of our question, looks like they're having issues with applying for private funding and knowing which foundation to approach. It's sort of tied for those two. It's applying for private funding and not being able to get it. That was about 29%, and then the other one.
And that's actually a surprise, right? Our federal funding has been incredibly stable over time for the most part, and so we've had a relationship with a federal agency. The grants are long, and we've been really good at applying for them. We are newer at this, and so we probably shouldn't be expecting exactly the same kind of return. If you submit a community action plan, unless you don't submit a community action plan, you're going to get your community action funding, or your services block grant funding. The private side is harder in a sense because we've done it as much. Out of the sales world, but no is just an opportunity to ask more questions. So on that, you applied and didn't win, it's learning what that's about. And so, my ideas around building relationships with foundations may also be what events are they producing that you can participate in? What boards are their board members serving on that you also serve on? So where I said something earlier about looking for board members from foundations, where are they serving and how can you connect with them in that way? Invite them in. You're not asking for money. Invite them to come be up an event, to MC an event, to get an award, to what they're finding and the grantees they're working with. These very much are relationship generating experiences, and applying and losing is just the first step. It's not difficult to not win on the first shot.
Okay. Well, so I don't see any other additional questions. Has anybody? Unless sending them directly to you, Julie, I don't see any on my end.
Let me look at the Q&A again. Somebody what's in the chat field? Yeah, I think we've hit all of them. Somebody was struggling with the audio. Somebody said is the best site to find prospective funders. The best site is foundationcenter.org. It is a subscription-driven site, and that's what I'm suggesting is that actually you invest in a subscription when you've got someone's time that can spend a time digging in. And then so I would suggest rather than having a year-long subscription that's fairly expensive and somebody checks in once in a while, I one of the shorter subscriptions, but I'd have somebody whose job it is for a week or a part of their job for 2 weeks or 3 weeks is to really dig in and identify. And come up with all of the kinds of creative search terms that we use in Google all the time. Every program name, every population descriptor, to look for those kinds of things. Look at what their keywords are and pick them off.
Okay. So somebody's asking, will there be links that you will provide? And I think you addressed that a little earlier, Julie.
Yep. I thought the slide was in here, and I apologize it's not.
That's okay. We'll update it, and we'll get out to you when we do the webinar, and it'll also be available on our website at partnershipced.org. So if there are any additional questions, I'd like to, unless there's anything else, Julie, that you wanted to touch on again?
Good.
Okay. Well, I definitely would like to, I'm going to pass it over to me. Definitely like to thank everyone for attending the webinar, successfully competing for funding, and of course we definitely want to thank Julie for sharing her insight and expertise into this very, very popular and needed subject matter. We will be continuing these webinars all the way up through to September. There will be different ones that advertise, and you'll see them again on e-news. I'd like to also let you know that our next webinar is the Core 4 funding, funding, I'm on the brain. Core 4 training for business startups. If you're looking to do a social enterprise or you just want to help build capacity and professional development for your brand, so your business T&T programs that you have. So that's going to be on June 20th at 2 p.m. And so, and of course, Julie is always available to answer any questions that you may have, and I'm going to put her slide up here that has her contact information on it. So let me find out. I think it's slide number 16. Okay, there's Julie's information at julie@istrategies.com, as well as Stacy Flowers is always available to answer any questions that you have. She's our Community Economic Development Director. I do want to ask for your forgiveness. During introduction, I said CED, assuming everybody knows what that means, and it means Community Economic Development. So all of you don't have CED programs. So I do want to let you know that that's what that acronym stands for. So if there aren't any other additional questions, just making sure that there aren't. I don't see any, and we will go ahead and close out and hope to see you all on the next webinar. Thanks so much. Just making sure. Oh, wait. This is we might have a few last-minute questions maybe coming in. Sure. Just some thank yous. Okay. Thanks again.
Actually, there's a funny one. If folks are still there around how do you get around the fact that your annual budget is $2 million, and it is about being really clear about what the limits of that $12 million are. So while you're big, you are using that money well, and use your advantage in terms of what your strengths are. Some foundations really do care about the capacity to actually deliver the innovative idea. Some foundations are particularly focused on the idea of investing in new small organizations, and what you those are not foundations you want to apply to. But it's a very serious question, and part of being really sure about who you talk to about foundation funding.
Are there any on my end? Any other questions on my end?
Nope, it's lighting up here either. Thank you, guys.
So much.
Sure.